Hi everybody, my name's Julia from Bobbins and Buttons, and today I'm going to do a tutorial to show you how to mark and make the gusset pocket for my David raincoat pattern. So the first thing that I want to mention about the David raincoat is it's designed to be made in laminated or coated fabric or other waterproof fabric. So some of the usual techniques that we use in dressmaking don't really work on this type of fabric. We can't really use pins or tacking. So at this point I just want to mention that my friend Louise from So Sophia has written a really great blog post with lots of tips and techniques for how to work with this fabric. So that's published on my blog, and I'll add a link below this video so that you can refer to that. So what I'm going to do to start with is mark the pocket position. You'll need a couple of tools. You'll need a ruler with a right angle. I quite like to use this Pattern Master, which is designed really for making patterns, but any ruler with a right angle will be fine. And you'll also need some chalk. So again, you can either use Tailor chalk or one of these rotary chalks, whatever you've got really. So what I've done to start with is pierce the paper pattern, and where the hole is I've just marked through with chalk so that I've got the top of the pocket position marked here. And now I'm going to take the ruler and just lay the right angle line against the centre front and line that up with the two chalk marks for the top of the pocket. And now I'm just going to really carefully draw in a line that joins those two marks up. So I'll just draw a little line here to show you where the end of the pocket is. So now when my pocket's prepared, I can lie that against this chalk line. So I'm going to start by making the gusset pocket. There are some markings on the gusset pieces in the corners, which is where we need to sew from and to. And I've measured those from the pattern and just put them on with pencil into the corners on the back of the fabric. But they're quite important to be fairly accurate to make this a bit of an easier job. So I'm going to start by stitching the bottom of the gusset to the bottom of the pocket between those two marks. So I'm just going to clip that together and take that to the machine, and I'll come back and show you how that looks in a second. So I've stitched the lower gusset in place, and what I've also done is I've just back stitched at that point to make that a strong point. So what we need to do now is bring the side gusset in place and just match those raw edges, and then we're going to start sewing the side gusset from that point, again the little pencil point, the 1.5, and up to the top. But the key here is to make sure that that point doesn't overlap the lower gusset. So when they're pulled back, I don't know if you can see this, they're butted up but they're not actually overlapping, and that's the way we're going to keep this nice and neat and get nice sharp corners. So we need to do that on this side and the same on the other side, and again reinforce with some back stitch top and bottom. So I have now stitched those side gussets in place, stopping at the corner point on both edges, so nothing is overlapping. So essentially I've actually got a little tiny gap there, but that won't matter too much. So the next thing to do is to fold the edges of the gusset, the outer edges on the lower edge and the sides. If you can press your fabric, go ahead and press it. If not, you can finger press it and get quite a good edge that way as well. So once you've done that, we're going to bring the lower edge of the gusset together at the corners, and this is what's going to give us our boxy pocket, and just clip that together. So now I'm going to stitch from the folded edge into the corner and just back stitch at both edges, again making sure that this stitching doesn't overlap, so to keep that corner nice and sharp. and I'm going to do the same at the other edge as well. And I'll come back and show you how that looks in a minute. So there we go, I've stitched the corners. So now we can turn that through. And all being well, you'll have a nice boxy pocket. So the next thing to do is just to stitch the hem at the upper edge. So again, if you can press this, go ahead and press it. If not, finger press it. So you need to turn in just a small amount, around about 1/2 centimetre to 1 centimetre, and then a second turning to make a double turned hem, and just clip that. You can open out the seam allowance at the corners and just clip in to hold that before you stitch it. So I'll go and stitch that now, and then I'll come back and show you how that looks. So I've gone ahead and stitched that upper hem, and now we're ready to stitch it to the front of the coat. So because it's a 3-dimensional pocket, it's going to be a bit trickier to stitch in place. So we've got our chalk line that we marked in earlier, and now I'm going to draw a chalk line for the other 3 sides, so we've got something to follow when we're on the sewing machine. So to start with, I'm going to draw a right angle down from the corner of the pocket placement line. So just putting the right angle line along that chalk line and drawing down. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. So we've got our side positions marked. And now I'm going to use the pocket as reference, because when we're sewing we all sometimes take slightly different seam allowances or slightly different hem allowance. So I think it's better just to measure the actual pocket. So this is 19 centimetres. So I'm going to mark a position at 19 centimetres from that upper chalk line and just put a point at that side seam. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. And now I'm going to square that across using one of the side seams to check that we're keeping nice and square. So I'm going to bring in the masking tape again. I'm going to start by taping the pocket to the upper line, just in the middle, just to hold that in place. And now what we want to do is just go to the lower edge, and I'm making sure the seams are facing in towards the pocket, and I'm just going to match those corners up because we're going to start by stitching across the base. Like I said, it's quite a tricky pocket to stitch on because you can't pin it and it's 3-dimensional. I've got those seams facing inwards, so what I'm going to do now is just stitch from the corner across to the other corner, and then I'll come back and show you how that looks. So I've stitched that lower edge of the gusset in place, and like I said, the seams were pointing inwards. As I approached the masking tape, I removed it, so just used it as if it was a pin, and then carried on. And I've reinforced really well at both ends because it needs to be nice and strong because it's a pocket. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the sides in place. So again, we're following the line, and I'm going to kind of fold the pocket so that it pleats in, kind of concertinas in from the side, makes a nice clear line to stitch. Can you see that? So it's kind of folding that inwards. And now I'm just going to take that down. Again, I can see the line here, which is what I'm following. And when I stitch this, I'm just going to come to that corner and back stitch, so not really going over the other one, but just butting up to the lower gusset and reinforcing at both ends. So I'm going to do that with both sides. Fold that in. I'm just making sure that that's not catching anything other than the side gusset when I sew. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that. So I've gone ahead and stitched the side gussets in place. So all that's left to do now is just to stitch the top edges of the pocket. But one thing I didn't mention was just before you stitch both your pockets, I would just, when you've drawn your chalk line, just check that they're the same on both front pieces so that you've got nice symmetrical pockets, because you don't want to go through all this and find out they're not even. So what we need to do now is just push the gusset in and bring the outer seam line over to the edge of the pocket, and then you can just take that down, and then all we're going to do is just stitch from the upper edge down to about 2.5 centimeters. You can put a little chalk line where to stop, and the same on the other side, just to hold the upper edge of the pocket in place. So this is quite a bulky point to sew, so it might just be worth checking on a little piece of scrap to start with that your machine can go through these amount of layers, because it is quite thick. You may need to change your needle to something a little bit heavier for this. So I've stitched the upper edges of the pocket, so that's held nice and flat, but you've got this lovely big explorer's pocket there to fill with lots of goodies. So now we're just going to make the flap. So right sides together of the flap pieces, and we're just going to stitch down each short edge, the seam allowance, and then turn that through. So I've stitched those sides, and just before I turn it through, actually I'm going to just trim the corners so that the corner isn't so bulky, and then turn it through. You can use a pencil or something just to poke that corner into a nice sharp point there. And now I'm going to go ahead and top stitch around the flap edge before applying it to the jacket. So I've stitched around the edge of the pocket flap, so now we're ready to apply it to the front piece. So to get this position, I'm going to draw a line 1 centimetre above the edge of the pocket. So I'm going to use my pattern ruler, which has the centimetre increments marked, and just line that up to the edge of the pocket and draw a chalk line there, and then I can do the same on the other front piece, and that's where I'm going to position pocket flap edge. So again, I'm going to use masking tape around the edges to hold it in place. I'm just checking it's lined up nicely with the sides of the pocket. And now I'm going to stitch that and then turn it down and stitch it again, but I'll come back and show you how this looks in a minute. So before I turn the pocket flap down to stitch again, I'm just going to trim a little bit of this seam off down to about 0.5, and then I'm going to turn that back and top stitch across the edge of the pocket to complete the pocket. So let's go ahead and trim that. You have to be quite careful not to catch the actual coat front in. Trim up some of these ends. Now I'm going to fold that down and just finger press it and stitch across the top there, and I'll show you how that looks in a second. So there we go, I've top stitched the pocket. Both seams I did on the upper edge of the flap I reinforced with back stitch at both ends, because obviously it takes a lot of wear and tear being a pocket, so you need to make sure you've got that really well reinforced. And there we go, it's enclosed all the raw seams quite nicely. So Explorer pockets ready to explore. So I hope you found that tutorial useful. If you'd like to see more tutorials, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.